Now, I'm Sinem Bal, one of the co-directors of the Center for the Study of Social and Global Justice. So we are so glad, so happy that Professor William Robinson joined us as Distinguished Professor of the Sociology on Global Studies and Latin American Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. As you may know, that his works focuses on global capitalism, transnational class formation, and the contemporary crisis of the world system. So we are so glad that he accepted our invitation today to make a review about the recent circumstances and process. And we'll just 25 minutes. William will make a presentation or make a review about the process. Then, just for a short time, we will do a question and answers. We will enter a questionnaire at this stage. Okay, William, if it's okay for you, we can start, and we would like to listen your presentation on From Venezuela to Iran, Connected Global Dots. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Sinem, for that introduction. And also thank you to Andreas Behler for first reaching out to me and for the center for organizing this. I've set the timer on my clock for 25 minutes. So if that does ring and I haven't finished, that will tell me I need to wrap it up because I do want to leave the second half hour for discussion. I obviously don't have to tell anyone that we are living in very dark times, and we are facing really a global emergency. Top on everyone's mind is making sense of what is unfolding in the Middle East with this war. And I'm going to conclude the presentation talking about the conjunctural situation right now in Iran and in the Middle East. But what I actually first want to do with the first 2/3 of the presentation is step back from the burning headlines of the moment and present the big picture. And I think we need to see the movement of global capitalism at this time as a whole, and bring in a global perspective, but also an historical perspective. There's certain limits to realist IR analysis, no matter how important that is. And I suggest that in times of epochal crisis, we can only make sense of events by framing them within their world historic context. And that context is the epochal crisis of global capitalism. Now, that epochal crisis, in my analysis, is playing out, and there are two big developments taking place that are actually intimately interconnected. And one is the hemisphere from which I'm speaking to you, the Americas. And you may know that last weekend there were both political and then military meetings in Washington and Miami to form the Shield of the Americas, which is this military political alliance of the far right and the fascist right in this hemisphere to wage war. And the other big development, that because these are connected, is the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran and the unfolding now of the Middle East war. I have to say that just this morning I had submitted it. Literally the day that the attacks began, I submitted an article to the Philosophical Salon. They accepted it, but it didn't come out actually until this very morning. And the first part of this presentation is going to follow that article. So let me start by saying there are three interwoven things that are now coming together in this global and historical conjuncture. The first of them is this epochal crisis of global capitalism. This is not a cyclical crisis. They take place about once every 10 years, appear as recessions. This is a deep structural crisis, the types of crises that appear about every 40 to 50 years and involve big wars and big conflicts and restructuring of the whole system. Since 2008, and then deepened in 2020 with the COVID crisis, we've moved into a deep structural crisis, which is very far from being resolved. It's actually manifesting itself now. But I think we're moving towards the third type of crisis, which is systemic. This is multidimensional. It's a crisis worldwide of social reproduction. We're seeing social collapse all around the world. We're seeing the expulsion of millions, of tens, actually of hundreds of millions. We have unprecedented inequality, social inequality, which of course has its economic impacts as well. We have 40 million billionaires and multimillionaires that now run the planet. That's the social dimension. The ecological dimension, we are facing the collapse of the biosphere, which makes this crisis existential. Politically, the global capitalist system faces a crisis of state legitimacy, of capitalist hegemony, and of geopolitical conflict. But what I want to do here, I want to situate the deep background in the economic or structural dimension of this multidimensional crisis, and that is a crisis of overaccumulation, of chronic stagnation in the global economy, and of a secular decline in the rate of profit now going on over 40 years, that secular decline. And what we have is a situation where the billionaire class, the transnational corporations and financial conglomerates, they are registering record profits, all-time high profits. For the United States, US-based corporations alone are now sitting on uninvested $7 trillion in profits. And worldwide, the figure is hovering around $20 trillion. And so we have a situation where the magnitude of profits being accumulated is unprecedented and it's growing, whereas the rate of profit is declining. And in Marxist political economy, that is a sure sign of deep structural crisis. So the system has been pushing forward in the face of this overaccumulation crisis through debt. Global debt now has surpassed $325 trillion between consumer and state debt. It's never been so high. It's totally unsustainable. And the other thing that's kept the global economy going until now is wild speculation in the global casino. And to give you just a little idea of the extent of this speculation, why it makes the whole global economy is so fragile, and now it's imploding. The global GDP is about $105 trillion, the production of goods and services. Yet total global assets is $1.7 quadrillion. Think about that gap. Out of that 1.7 quadrillion, 620 trillion correspond to real assets, like to houses and buildings and property and so forth. That means there is a quadrillion dollars out there, which is completely fictitious and which is simply for speculation. So these are the dimensions of the structural dimensions of the crisis. And this overaccumulation crisis generates intense pressures for outward expansion. And so the big challenge that the transnational capitalist class and the political agents and the states that represent that class face is, how do you continue expanding outward? Tremendous pressures for outward expansion. China reported in January that it had a trade deficit last year of $1.2 trillion. And so all of the countries have to expand. This generates intense geopolitical competition and international tensions. And how do you expand outward now? Well, through wars, through conflict, through repression. And of course, now you're getting an idea of what's going on, well, here in my hemisphere that I was speaking about, but specifically in the Middle East. That's the first of these three interwoven things that are coming together. The second is there is the rise of a new hegemonic block of capital, a new hegemonic complex of capital, which brings together the big tech corporations, that is the digital corporations, with transnational finance and with the military-industrial repression complex. These three fractions of capital are coming together and forming a new hegemonic capital complex. Big tech, as you all know, have been sucking in worldwide enormous amounts of value, unbelievable amounts, trillions in value. As far as transnational finance, in 2022, there were 33 trillion and multi-trillion dollar capital investment management firms at the very heart of the global economy. And these management firms, by the way, they increased from 17 to 33 just in the last 7-8 years. They control $83 trillion in wealth, and they own more than half of all tech stock worldwide. So there we see the fusion of big tech with transnational finance. Then big tech is pivoting towards war and repression. You all know that. We're seeing all of that in the headlines. We're seeing it playing out in real time. They even came up with a new term for that, defense tech. And so warfare, repression, surveillance is now digitally automated, digitally driven, and we see big tech together with transnational finance. It's now fusing with the military-industrial repression complex, completing this capital power block, which is now in control. And I want to tell a little anecdote just to give you an idea of how bizarre and frightening this new capital power block is. In February, the Pentagon named the CEOs of the technology CEOs of the leading tech corporations, Microsoft and Palantir and Meta and all of them. They named those CEOs lieutenant colonels in the US Army. They've never had any military service. They're not soldiers. They're business people in their 40s and 50s and 60s. And they put on military uniforms and named lieutenant colonels. That gives you an idea of how this power block is also fusing with the state, the emerging fascist state. And so this block of capital is leading a radical new round of restructuring and transformation worldwide, which is digitally driven, and global Trumpism is its instrument. Global Trumpism represents an embryonic fascist state. This is the classical situation where a block of capital, which is violent and pushing towards war and repression, is fusing with a reactionary and repressive power in the state. So in the Salon article, I mentioned that I just this morning came out an article in the Philosophical Salon. I want to just literally quote a sentence from that article. Global Trumpism pulls together a range of ideologically and politically aligned far-right authoritarian and neo-fascist forces that champion the Trumpist agenda and applaud its transnational gangsterism. So here inside the US, I know you're on the other side of the Atlantic, but you're following what's been happening with ICE. ICE, for me, is the new paramilitary brown shirts that we have here. And more specifically, what ICE is doing is forming this bridge between the fascist state and a fascist reorganization of civil society. We are pushing back and fighting back, and so this fascist project is not yet consolidated. It's trying to. But the key point is that Trumpism is the instrument of this new capital complex. And that's why you see figures such as Peter Thiel, such as Elon Musk playing such a central role. There's a larger story here I don't have time to go into, but I can say we can say that worldwide global Trumpism, which I'll define in just a moment with a little more detail, it's one of its objectives is to bring all states around the world into alignment with the global Trumpist project and have all states align with the interests of this new capital, hegemonic capital complex. So what we've seen over the last few decades and intensifying in the 2010s to date is increasing economic totalitarianism. What I mean by that is you've never had such a concentration and centralization of wealth and economic resources in the hands of so few in the transnational capitalist class, in those 40 million people that I mentioned. And so this economic totalitarianism is now bringing its counterpart, political totalitarianism, in the fascist state. And also, if you want to have the face of the new transnational fascist corporation, that is Palantir. I'm sure we all know and have heard about Palantir. That is the face of this complex. It's the fascist face of this complex. So when I've made this point in some of the forums, I've been said, well, you're looking at it in reverse, William. It's Trump controls them. They're telling capital what to do. But it's not true. That is, we have to go beyond surface appearance to the underlying essence. Capital is doing Trumpism, global Trumpism is doing the bidding of this capitalist group. So Trump, in just 1 year in office, has carried out 646 deregulatory actions, completely deregulated AI and the tech and finance. And let's turn to the tariff wars for a minute. This is crucially important. What is really going on behind these tariff wars is that every time that Trump has imposed tariffs and then said, well, now I'm going to negotiate with that government and we're going to lower those tariffs through negotiation and reach a deal. The deal they have reached has always involved the other country being subject to the tariffs, deregulating AI. And that is absolutely crucial. Right now, there are 64 countries that the U.S. is negotiating with to deregulate AI and have them abrogate their regulatory laws for artificial intelligence. So this gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. And because there is not a single economic, social, political, military, governmental institution in the world which is not at this time dependent on the new digital technologies and on the individuals and corporations that develop them and know how to apply and use them. For that reason, this new capital power block has enormous structural power. There's no time to go into detail on how that's been exercised, except for the case we're going to get to right now, which is this new war in the Middle East. So the third of these three things, remember that I said there's three interwoven things coming together to make sense of this historic conjuncture we are in. The transnational capitalist class, led by this bloc, is now carrying out a new predatory round of expansion involving savage militarized forms of extraction and accumulation, with the objective here, first, unloading the massive overaccumulated capital. Where do you unload it? In wars and conflicts, and opening up opportunities for investing and unloading that capital around the world. And this expansion involves seizing resources, especially land, energy, and minerals that are needed to feed AI and the digital technologies. And so part of this story is that data centers need to be fed. You need land, water, energy, minerals to feed the data center, to feed this new technology. And that's really core to this outward violent expansion of capital in the face of the structural crisis. And so global Trumpism is being used to smash open space for this expansion, and also to displace whole populations, eliminate some of them because they're surplus humanity. There's too many people to be absorbed by capital, and they need to be eliminated. That's the deeper structural story behind the genocide in Gaza. So global Trumpism smash opens this space, displaces people, eliminates some of them, and then social systems of social control and surveillance to control those displaced. And global Trumpism develops the policies, the economic policies that this new bloc needs. Trump has proposed in increasing the U.S. Pentagon budget from $900 billion to $1.5 trillion. That is just an unbelievable amount. And so behind that, of course, is what I've referred to elsewhere as militarized accumulation and accumulation by repression, meaning that warfare and surveillance and control and repression and all kinds of conflict is a way of accumulating capital in the face of chronic stagnation and unloading all that overaccumulated capital. And it's also a means of controlling a global restive population, which is in open revolt everywhere around the planet. This is part of the story of a global police state. And the thing is that global Trumpism is saying, I don't even need to legitimate anything I do anymore, right? That's the new stage we're in. We see with Venezuela, what happened to Venezuela, and now with Iran. And one other thing on this point, again, I'm concluding these three interrelated dimensions of what's coming together in this conjuncture. One other point here. The U.S. legitimated what it did in Venezuela, the intervention in Venezuela, as fighting drugs, and it just intervened in Mexico in the name of fighting drugs, and it is now engaged militarily in Ecuador in the name of fighting drugs. And this military political alliance, fascist military political alliance in the hemisphere, it's all built around the claim that it's to fight drugs. In fact, it has zero to do, and we can get into this in discussion, this has zero to do with combating narco trafficking with the drug war. Absolutely nothing to do with it. It's actually, in the Western Hemisphere, the mechanism or the legitimation is we have to fight drugs in order to militarize and push forward what's going on. So I want to quote again, as I move now towards specifically focusing on the Middle East and this Iran war, to one more quote from my Philosophical Salon article. I just quote it. The consolidation of the hegemonic capital complex appears now to hinge on the ideological extremism and political warlordism of global Trumpism. This complex is deeply invested in transnational systems of warfare, social control, repression, and surveillance. These systems are becoming digitalized, automated, and deeply embedded in the global economy and society. So we can summarize these three dimensions coming together as the new project, which is Pax Silica. Repeat, Pax Silica. The U.S. Secretary for, I believe, Energy or Commerce, Jacob Hellberg, he convened a meeting on December 12 of this past year, just a few months ago, and brought together, there were representatives from 30 some odd countries, an initial 12 or 13 countries signed on to this declaration of Pax Silica. And he opened up that meeting saying, if the 20th century ran on oil and steel, the 21st century runs on compute and the minerals that feed it. Then he went on to say that Pax Silica involves develop, and this is the quote then, the development of global AI supply chains that are to drive the historic opportunity and demands for energy, critical minerals, manufacturing, technological hardware, infrastructure, and new markets not yet invented. So that is the project of Pax Silica being led by the United States, being put in place, and this is the perfect transition now to get into the Middle East, because that's what this is all about in the larger picture. So we have to see the war going on in the Middle East as a war for global capital, a war by global capital. And to reiterate, two axes in this war right now, which of global Trumpism, which is the Middle East and the shield of the Americas here. So turning to the Middle East and West Asia, I want to say that the story really needs to be started with Gaza, not with Iran, but first with Gaza. The genocide has been followed by the installation of the so-called Board of Peace. Moving forward, I'm not going to call it a Board of Peace. I'm going to call it what it is, which is a Board of Genocide. But this Board of Genocide, we have to see, is a laboratory for Pax Silica. The genocide for 2 years going on, and we've gone from high intensity to low intensity genocide now. The high intensity genocide established the conditions in Gaza and pushing towards establishing it throughout the Middle East for Pax Silica. And now the war on Iran seeks to consolidate, is failing, we're going to get to that in just a minute. It seeks to consolidate the region-wide conditions for Pax Silica. The genocide is a global affair. Gaza is a global space. And the fact that Israel has gotten away with impunity with those 2 years plus of genocide is what paved the way for what we are seeing now and for the attack on Iran. So the Washington-Tel Aviv axis is at the very heart of global Trumpism and at the very heart of Pax Silica. You may remember, I want to see how I'm doing on time. Gosh, a lot of time is going by.
We can give you a couple of, please go ahead. It's nice to listen you. William, just go ahead.
Okay. I'll cut a few corners here, but the Washington-Tel Aviv axis is at the very heart of global Trumpism and at the heart of Pax Silica. You may remember that Francesca Albanese released her report late last year and indicated that 1,600 corporations are deeply implicated in the genocide. But then she singled out 60 corporations which are deeply implicated in Gaza, in Israel, in this genocide, and those 60 read like a who's who of the big tech corporations, the big financial conglomerates, and the big military-industrial repression corporations, just that hegemonic bloc that I was mentioning. So Trump inaugurated at the World Economic Forum in January, this past January, he inaugurated this Board of Genocide. 35 states signed on. Many of them are global Trumpist aligned states, not all of them. And it's clear that the Board of Genocide is a political instrument for global Trumpism. Some of the states that are noteworthy for signing on are the United States, Israel, of course, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Argentina, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Indonesia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Morocco, El Salvador, Paraguay, Hungary, and others. So we have in the Middle East the key players in this war now, of course, not Iran, of the Gulf states, and in the Western Hemisphere, the key global Trumpist military fascist shield of the America countries. As you know, it cost $1 billion to purchase a seat. Trump named himself chair for life. Western Europe has declined to sign on. China has not signed on. However, it's very noteworthy that both Russia and China did not veto the resolution in the Security Council establishing this board of genocide. So the world's historic context here also we have to mention is that the United States, everyone knows this, I'm not saying anything new, is losing its role, its position as the hegemonic anchor of world capitalism. And the post-World War II international order, it's crumbling if it's not already completely crumbled. And in part, this Board of Genocide is intended to be an alternative institutional framework and political instrument to that post-World War II international order with the United Nations at the center. So step one here is in the plan, in the Pax Silica plan, in the global Trumpism plan, in the Israeli plan, is move from high to low intensity genocide. And so that is achieved with the ceasefire that was negotiated in October. And that genocide, we have to stress, has been wildly profitable. It was negotiated, even who it's negotiated by is very relevant, by Witkoff and Kushner. Witkoff and Kushner now are crypto billionaires, and crypto is the perfect fusion of big tech, high tech with finance. And then that was step one. Step two is now to draft a plan for post-high intensity genocide. And this involves this, and you know all of this, but now we're going to link it all together. Massive takeover of Gaza, of course, oil and gas, and build a Ben Gurion canal and beachfront real estate, and tourism. But the real core of the takeover of Gaza is and this now is going to link it with Iran, is to convert the Strip into a hub for public-private power access around which tech and finance will have free rein to develop a sovereign, AI-driven, high-tech corporate fiefdom. And that will be a model for all around the world. In questions and discussion, please let me mention the case of Honduras, because that's very important, how that actually fits in here. So the goal here is to establish an Israeli Gulf state axis as a regional dry run for a global Pax Silica. Now we see how the Gulf states enter into the picture. Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump, was appointed by Trump's so-called envoy of peace. And he's central to the negotiations around Pax Silica and around this war. And he declared that Gaza and this board of genocide will be a model for elsewhere around the world. So what we know publicly, because now there's what was leaked to... So that's my 25 minutes. I'll try and wrap it up in 3-4 minutes or so. I'll do my best. The publicly, we have the 20-point a plan that says Gaza will be turned into a special economic zone, opened up for transnational corporate plunder and control. But what's really important is the GREAT plan. Now, GREAT stands for Gaza Reconstruction, Economic Acceleration, and Transformation. The GREAT plan was leaked to the press. It was supposed to be private. And it identifies, and now comes the key link, it identifies Iran as an obstacle to this plan for Gaza. And the GREAT plan calls for Palestinians to voluntarily depart from Gaza. Some would be allowed to stay as professionals and as manual labor, controlled through Israeli biometric surveillance with checkpoints, with digital currency. Digital currency is very important here. No time to discuss that now. With a U.S. military base of 5,000 soldiers, now officializing and legitimating the Israeli occupation of the Gaza itself, where they control 60% right now. So in summary, this GREAT program is for a takeover by this hegemonic bloc of capital. Israel, please note, is the third largest global tech hub worldwide. It's a totally militarized economy in which you have a fusion in the Israeli economy, because it's a microcosm of what's going on globally now. A fusion of the military plus high tech plus finance. It's really, Israel is an extreme embodiment of the new hegemonic bloc of capital, of Pax Silica. And Israel, and now the whole global capitalist system, must have war. Peace is dangerous to this new accumulation model. So beyond, now bringing in the Gulf states and Iran, beyond Israel, according to this plan laid out, the Gulf states and Israel as an alliance are supposed to be a regional corridor for Pax Silica. And the Gulf states, it's no surprise, mediated the ceasefire, and the Gulf states, as I mentioned previously, joined the board of genocide. So already, even during the genocide, Israel and the Gulf states were sharing military intelligence and security cooperation in conjunction with CENTCOM, right, with the U.S. Central Command. And the Gulf states are massively invested in tech and finance and crypto. They're cross-invested with Israel. They're fully invested in AI industries. In fact, those AI industries and this Pax Silica block is linked to everything else going on economically in the Gulf states: health, tourism, finance, education, industry, everything. So this is finally, then I conclude a minute or so now, so then we get to the attack on Iran. So the first thing we have to see is what takes place between 2023 and 2025 is that the Gaza genocide becomes the vehicle for redrawing the entire regional geopolitical map, starting with Lebanon and the destruction of an offensive capacity for Hezbollah, and then Syria with Assad, and then with the destruction of Rojava. And the final ingredient here is Iran. That you then have to get rid of Iran. And that's why I said the great project targets Iran, making way for Pax Silica in the whole region. Now, I don't have time to go into detail, but there's a bigger story in which you have two things coming together. You have Eretz Israel, that is the project of Greater Israel, Zionist expansion. You have that coming together with the global Pax Silica project, and they are sometimes in tension. We'll discuss that in discussion, that tension there. But here's the thing, that the U.S. and Israel miscalculated. Washington was overconfident after its attack on Venezuela, which went so smoothly for it. The whole Pax Silica and the whole project may come crashing down in the Middle East. It depends on how this unravels minute by minute, hour by hour, and day by day. But this conflict is sowing the seeds for state collapse, for interminable violence in the region. Israel has now turned to Lebanon, as you know, wanting to turn Lebanon into another Gaza, turning the West Bank into Gaza, and turning Iran into Gaza. And Iranian resistance, I'm wrapping it up now. I'm so sorry that I calculated I talked for a half hour, but the last few comments here. Iran is waging what is a war of attrition, a strategy of maximizing the costs for the aggressors. And its missile system is extremely important because it doesn't have air power, but it has missile power. And it just, I think yesterday, launched its first Sejil missile, the new kind of missile that it was holding back on. It's been targeting, as you all know, U.S. military bases, oil facilities, tech installations, desalination plants. And Israel has actually been pushed on the defensive. You know, the incredible censorship. We really don't know what's happening in Israel. It's nightmarish censorship. But the sealing off of the Strait of Hormuz has the potential to implode the whole global economy. And here we're revealing what's happened the last 50 years, extreme global integration of the global economy and extreme global interdependence in a globally integrated production, financial, and service and energy system. And so this single little node can implode the whole global economy. The U.S. and Israel, they want to see an internal uprising in Iran. I don't think it's going to happen now. The Iranian regime is a murderous regime. That we can discuss. There's no question about that, but I don't see an internal uprising at this time. On the contrary, the Iranian regime has been able to, or is externalizing its own internal contradictions. And this whole complex is in crisis. I want to conclude, I would be remiss if I didn't conclude by saying the humanitarian nightmare which is unfolding here. 7 million people already displaced. That includes the 2 million in Gaza, 4 million in Iran, 1 million in Lebanon. Let's remember that there are 30 million transnational migrant workers in the Middle East, impoverished and miserated workers with no real rights. What we should be asking ourselves, how does a popular project from below, the working classes and the oppressed and exploited majority in the Middle East, how do they respond to this war going on? From their viewpoint, this is a fight amongst repressive states, and they're in a desperate effort simply to survive. The situation is too chaotic for organized resistance at this point. And everything's connected to everything else. May I speak for 2 more minutes, Cecil?
Of course. So, take your time.
I want to point out how everything here is connected to everything else. Think dialectically. So what's going on in the Middle East in turn has affected the civil war in Sudan, because the United Arab Emirates were sending weapons and supplies to the rapid deployment forces in Sudan. They don't get those supplies. And so now the Sudanese army is destroying them. Russia has now been allowed to export its oil. So this war is going to reintegrate Russia in the circuits of global capital. Here inside the U.S., gas prices is spiking, and so is a general inflation, which is creating a political crisis internally of opposition to Trumpism and to the war. And then we have a social collapse being accelerated worldwide with a raise in prices and so forth. And then the Gulf states are so massively invested with their trillions of dollars in sovereign wealth funds in everything going on in the United States. And they are pulling out or suggesting they'll pull out their investment from the United States, bringing down the U.S. economy. There's a flight right now of the wealthy elite out of the region. So, you could go on and on, but everything's connected to everything else. I'm really fearful that Iran will launch nuclear weapons, especially when, Israel, when Iran introduces this new missile that is extremely dangerous dangerous, extremely frightening. Let's remember, the only thing that the US and Iran can do now is go from an air war to a ground war. And that will be a disaster because there's 1 million people under arms defending Iran. So this is a quagmire if they don't seek an off-ramp. Maybe they will in the next few days. Maybe it will get, even more out of control. So I'll just conclude with this sentence, with saying this one thing, that this is exactly how epochal crisis of global capitalism is playing out. This epochal crisis does not have a pre-written script. And we are moving now from the structural dimension of the economic crisis to a global political military crisis. This could have broken out anywhere in this global capitalist tinderbox, but the most likely place it would have broken out, and now is breaking out, is in the Middle East. So I'll end with that.
Wow, William. It was really, really brief, but very intense presentation. Yet again, when I listened to you in the previous time, I remember myself, you put my head from one point to another. My head was always shaking. And again, you put our heads from one point to another. Thanks a lot for this. And every detail I try to take notes, but I try to get as much as I can. Luckily, we are recording it, and we have a chance to listen in every detail and taking notes. Okay, let's take questions. Also, Tony shared this Pax Silica. Of course, it's a new term. At least for me, it's just I just didn't consider that detail about Pax Silica. And at the end, maybe if we have a chance or time, maybe I have some questions about it as well, about other actors. Okay, we can take questions now. So who wants to start as worst? I look at the list of participants. Yes, one hand, I see it. Just give me a second, please. Okay, Zeynep Karimi first and Daniel Rosler the second. Zeynep Karimi.
All right, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Zeynep. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for the great discussion. And I think, I maybe not make so much sound because, as an Iranian, also struggle with what is going on in Iran. And I totally agree with the speech that I don't think there would be an uprising because Iranians clearly see that they are struggling with two different systems of oppression. And but my question would be, where do you see Europe in this complex?
Where do you see? Sorry.
Where do you see Europe in this
Europe in this context? Yes, I was about to ask the same question, William. Would you like to collate all of them or answer question by question? What would you like to do?
Take the three and then respond to the three before we
First three, then after we can continue. Okay. Thanks, Zeynep. Then Daniel.
I actually had the same question, so yeah.
You had the same questions. I had the same question, especially I can maybe put a mark. I can maybe specify it. What about Germany, especially in this context, especially this Pax Silica line? Okay, Zeynep.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, so I was reading that Trump had already renamed the Department of Defense in early September 2025 to Department of War. So all this was actually being prepared. And for how long do you think, this plan has been in place, and what kind of implications this will have for the U.S. Economy if it actually does collapse? I'm really wondering what you think about that.
Yeah. So these are big questions. The one about Europe. So the question is, how does Europe fit into this conflict, but also how does Europe fit into Pax Silica? And of course, the one thing is, you see the same capital complex emerging in Europe as well. Europe did not join, none of the Western European countries joined yet that board of genocide. And again, I want to reiterate that project might come crashing down. The genocide won't. The genocide is moving ahead. As you know, Gaza has already been resealed. But the board might come crashing down depending on how this unfolds. Western European countries did not join that board. But they have come out, with the exception of Spain, they have come out in support of the attacks on Iran, even if they haven't framed it like that. The German chancellor came and visited Trump in the White House a week ago and basically said, we need to support this attack on Iran. France announced that it is sending a fleet, a military fleet, to the Middle East. The British Prime Minister, as you know, first said that you cannot use our bases, and then said, yes, you can use them for defensive purposes only, but then between the cracks, I mean, a stupid comment, for defensive purposes only, because then he said, yeah, you can, basically admitted you can use them to use planes to leave and bomb Iran. So Europe is on board with limited active participation in this war. Europe is completely on board with Pax Silica, but we have to say that the two really centers for the development and projection of Pax Silica in different ways is the United States and China. The United States and China have the biggest tech corporations and the most advanced technology. Despite appearances, the U.S. and Chinese economies and these complexes are intimately integrated with each other. And so Europe fits in with that, but really the complex, if you want to have a sort of I won't say spatial, but if you want to see really the leading edges of the development of this complex, it's the United States and China. As far as the renaming the Department of Defense Department of War, the larger story here is and this is worldwide. And so let me bring Europe back into this again. What we're seeing is the complete militarization, intensified militarization of the whole global economy and society, and that involves just about every country in the world. Well, the U.S. and we have to be clear that this is not just the increase of military budgets. I mentioned that Trump is proposing to move from $900 billion to 1.5 trillion, which is an unspeakable increase. And so part of this is state military budgets. Europe is rearming. You know that they already agreed to the 5% increase in the military budgets. Basically, in the last year, in 2025, over 100 countries increased their military budgets, many of them by 10%. There's a generalized remilitarization of the whole world. Now, part of this is geostrategic questions, and I've mentioned that a little bit, and we can talk about that, but I want to get at the underlying thing going on here, that this is beyond military Keynesianism, that what I term the global police state, or militarized accumulation and accumulation by repression, that is driving and sustaining the whole global economy, and more, and so all institutions are being militarized. So it's not a surprise that the U.S. renames the Department of War, that the Trump regime comes in and it takes a project which was already underway. It's not Trump that launched this remilitarization and this fascist project. It's been building up for many years because of the contradictions inherent to the crisis of global capitalism. But Trump has taken the Trump regime, a qualitative step further. And that's what's so significant going on. And as far as the attack on Iran, if that's just Trump well, Israel has always wanted that. Israel has always. And so has the United States. But what we can say is this qualitative difference with Trump is now they've said, well, you know, the whole international legal system and even trying to legitimate anything we do can just go to hell. We don't need to do any of that anymore. We're just, you know, an outright move into a new type of 21st century fascist state and bloc. And so with that, I think from the moment that Trump comes into power, his new cabinet, they're already calculating what they can do with Iran, how they can attack Iran. So there's more to be told here, but I also see other hands going up.
Maybe complementary. So also there is a question Gracia has wrote, what about Russia and China in this? I think, Gracia, you want to say in this Pax Silica line, you mean the position of Russia and China, as I understand, right? Please correct me. And also Oliver has a question.
Thank you very
Oh,
much for that, William. I really enjoyed it. It was a bold intervention. You've written a lot on Latin America, and I'd just like you to say something more specifically about the role of Latin America in this, and also Venezuela. Your take on the motivations behind the kidnapping of Maduro. Of course, the U.S. national security strategy has placed an important emphasis on Latin America. So it'd be interesting to hear more about that.
thank
Sure.
you, Oliver. And yes, Gracia said is asking for Russia and China in this Pax Silica line. Okay, the third questions in Hewitt.
Yep, thanks, William. I enjoyed reading your book. I found it very stimulating, and I've been very impressed and with your analysis and presentation tonight. I just wondered whether the argument that I had with my daughter over Christmas around the film around Cy Hirsch and the Nord Stream detonation that was under the previous US administration, but that seems to have been strategic, and it appears to me to be at the root of what's unfolding now. Does that make any sense?
Let me work backwards then. I have to confess, I have not seen that film. But I'll make sure after getting that question that I'll go and see it right away. So I can't answer that question, but maybe Ian, before I get to the issue of Russia and China and also the role of Latin America, can you just like summarize in a minute or so what the discussion with your daughter was?
Cy Hirsch is this investigative reporter, and
Right, I know who he is.
his reputation was shredded when he wrote an article saying that the US had detonated the two pipelines. And
Right.
the film on the one hand builds up his reputation as a reporter, but then tries to demolish him in terms of the report about they're saying he's getting old, he's getting senile, and so his report around the Nord Stream was
Right.
it paints that into the realms of conspiracy.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I know the documentary is on Netflix. I just haven't seen it yet. So yeah, I didn't know that larger context. Yeah, I know Hosea Hirsch has been around since the 1960s. Unfortunately, we're moving into this regime of incredible censorship worldwide. So, of course, we have no idea what's going on in Israel because it's totally censored, right? We just get a little glimpse here and there of what leaks out. The reason I'm mentioning that is because also in the United States, the head of the FCC, and I'm sure some of you saw this, literally yesterday, the head of the FCC said and I'm paraphrasing his own words, said, if the media does not, and he's referring here to mainstream media, to CNN, right, not to leftist media, if the media doesn't get on board with this war against Iran and cover it more favorably, they will lose their licenses. So we are moving into a regime worldwide of censorship. So someone that would do the type of reporting that Cy Hirsch did, throughout the late 20th century until he finally, you can no longer do that in corporate media, censored corporate media. So it's not surprising that they're destroying his character. That's part of a larger story of radical censorship and control of information and images and narratives. As far as the bombing of the Nord Stream, even before he came out with his article, I mean, it was pretty clear. There was already a lot of circumstantial evidence, and I'm just surprised that they would go so far as to completely, make him, senile conspiracy theorist. But so that's the only thing I have to say about that without actually having seen the documentary. That's that. And by the way, I also want to say something else with no time to go into detail. If we see something contradictory, you may say it's contradictory. Why would the U.S. Blow that up? And that because there's a lot of different. So yes, there's a power structure. Yes, there's a project. It's being pushed. There's a coherence to it. We're analyzing it. But it doesn't mean that there's multiple points of division and conflict and confusion among ruling groups, among the different actors involved and the different institutions involved. So things are also contradictory. That's why I mentioned in the presentation, Israel has a project of Pax Silica, yes, and it also has a project of Eretz Israel, expanding Israel. I mean, the dream of the Zionist was to have half of Saudi Arabia, half of Egypt, all of Jordan, all of Lebanon. And so Israel has its project of Eretz Israel, but it also has its global capitalist project of Pax Silica. And its Eretz Israel project can clash with other actors and other things going on here. So it's not surprising to see contradiction. As far as Russia and China, I will continue to be controversial on this because I've written extensively and debated extensively on this. Russia and China might not be, before we get to Iran and Pax Silica, they might not be pushing the genocide in Gaza. Definitely not. They're not responsible for the actual carrying out of the genocide, but both of those countries, and especially China, are deeply integrated into, deeply embedded in the political economy of the Middle East, and deeply embedded in the Israeli political economy, and deeply invested with deep economic interests. And behind those economic interests is a political interest to not get too involved in stopping any of this. Because you have to think that through. They did not veto the creation of the Board of Genocide. China is Israel's #2 trading partner. It's its #1 exporter and number 2 trading partner. Chinese corporations are deeply invested in the Israeli Pax Silica and the global Pax Silica complex. Chinese corporations are deeply invested in Silicon Valley here in the United States, state and private corporations. China is deeply invested in the Gulf countries and in their high tech and in their entire economies. If China, we know that it's the crime of crime, the genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, but what no one says is that every state in the world is required by international law to do everything possible to stop the genocide. If China had decided to place sanctions, economic sanctions on Israel for this genocide, the Israeli economy would have been brought to its knees. Maybe it would have had to stop the genocide. And China has not done that. And now with regard to Russia, Russia is also invested deeply in the region, but it's not the same role that China is playing. And China is a global superpower, is going to overtake the United States in that regard. But Russia is also deeply invested. Russia is invested in this situation with regard not just to its political ties with Iran, which is the first thing that jumps out when we think about it, but more generally, Russia plays a key role in the global oil market, and it has a whole lot of interests tied up here. I don't want to go into too much detail because one, you already know it all, but you know that Russia really doesn't have a big problem with rearranging the situation in Syria and with coming to terms with and really embracing Israel and the Israeli project for Syria. There's a lot to discuss here. There's no time to unpack it, so I don't want to put too much out and not explain what I'm saying. But basically, the role of Russia and China at this point is participation in Pax Silica with different geopolitical and certain different strategic differences with the U.S. and the U.S.-Israeli axis and with Western Europe. But the larger project deeply involves Russia and China. Now, let me link that to Latin America here for a minute. So again, there's contradictory processes going on. And so we all know that the headline stories about this, that Trump declared the updating of the Monroe Doctrine to call it the Donroe Doctrine, and that doctrine says that the U.S. should be the big power in the Americas and China should not have so much influence. That is a part of the story, but that's not the big story. Remember, in radical social science, we look at surface appearance and we go to underlying essence of what is going on. And we never take the discourse and public pronouncements of presidents and heads of states at face value. So yes, there is a part of the U.S.-Chinese competition in Latin America, but the biggest story of Latin America is that transnational capital needs to violently expand. It needs to open up space. Let me turn to Venezuela because you're asking about that. Venezuela has those oil reserves and they're now really central because the oil is now going to Israel. As soon as they stop sending it to Cuba and start sending the Venezuelan oil to Israel for Pax Silica and for the whole Middle East project. But also Venezuela is loaded with critical minerals, which AI is needed for. That invasion was a Pax Silica invasion of Venezuela, but even more than that, the attack on Venezuela was supposed to be the first step. It's simply to open up space for transnational capital through the global Trumpism to expand into all of South America. So the next step is now Ecuador. And the next step is saying there's this regional military political pact for so-called war on drugs. So it's how do you expand and break open all of this new space in Latin America? And if you look at a more fine-tuned level where they're going to, let me take the case, I know I'm talking too much, but you know, this, when you ask the question, there's no way to answer it simply. So let me say something about what's going on in Ecuador. Let me say something about Greenland, because that tells us a lot about not confusing surface appearance from underlying essence. And then let me stop.
That will be great. Greenland also will be great for my side.
Yes. So starting with Ecuador, look at what's going on in Ecuador over the last few years. You have an extremely powerful indigenous movement and a popular movement, and they have had one uprising after another. And they had a general strike which lasted, indigenous-led, 6 weeks in October of this past year of 2025. Previously, because of all of these popular uprisings, they passed a law saying the U.S. cannot have a military base. And Manta, the military base of Manta, had to leave years ago. And they passed a previous law saying you cannot get at oil and at mining inside the Amazonian region. That's standing law. That was passed because of mass struggle. So the challenge for Paxilla, for the transnational capitalist class, for this new hegemonic bloc, for global Trumpism, how do you turn the tide in Ecuador and get at all of those resources? So long story short, you say we're fighting drug traffickers, and you get in there militarily, you get in there politically, and you repress and displace the population, and that is exactly what's happening. And it's no surprise that about 3 days ago or 4 days ago, the Ecuadorian government, in the context of this military aggression of the U.S. and Ecuadorian army in the name of fighting drug trafficking, they banned the principal opposition party that had passed the legislation banning mining and oil in the Amazon. So you get the larger picture here of, sure, U.S.-Chinese competition, but that's ridiculously overblown because U.S.-Chinese corporations, they're anyway cross-invested with each other. The bigger story is that this violent new form of violent predatory extractivist expansion and accumulation. Now, concluding, and we may have to conclude with this, where we reach the hour point, is Greenland. So the line goes now that it's because of security against Russia and China. Okay, that is a part of the story. There's multiple levels to the story, but there's the most underlying story. And the underlying story has nothing to do with U.S., Russia, China security competition, and everything to do with Pax Silica, and everything to do with this new hegemonic complex of capital, and everything to do with what Greenland has. Number one, Greenland has unbelievable deposits of critical minerals. Remember, the new digitally driven global economy, the new complex, they need all these new mineral resources. That's first of all, they need to get under there. The Danish government says you cannot dig up the glaciers and get under there. So the problem of Danish sovereignty over Greenland is a serious problem. Secondly, there's massive geothermal energy there. And what do you need geothermal energy for? You need it for data centers, for the massive energy needed for data centers. And third, you also have the experiment. Let me get to Honduras. All of this is connected. Everything's connected to everything else. That's why the big picture is so crucial at this moment of global crisis. So what happened in Honduras, and excuse me for introducing so much stuff, but I'm going to connect those dots. That's the title of the course. The lecture is, right, connect the dots. So what happened in Honduras, the previous fascist, military government that had a coup d'etat against Zelaya in 2009, and they took over, they established what are called ZEDEs. ZEDEs is Spanish, Zonas de Empleo y Desarrollo Económico, the zones of employment and economic development. And what the military government that took over did is they gave several chunks of territory, including the island of Roatan in the Caribbean. They turned it over to private corporations, specifically Palantir and the digital corporations and the crypto corporations and the financial corporations. And they said, you can run that as private corporate territory. So the progressive Libre government comes in is it 2018 or 19 or 20? Sorry, I forgot the date, maybe 2020, and reverses that. And so now they cannot experiment with private corporate fiefdoms in Honduras. So that's why Trump intervenes in the Honduran elections of last year and says, you better put that right-wing political party back in power, and sure enough, they win the elections. They're part of Shield of the Americas now. Why am I saying that? Because this new hegemonic bloc of capital, as capital takes over the world in a new way, wants to do away with state authority, except use state as an instrument for itself. And so it wants to have these experimental private corporate fiefdoms. So you have Honduras, that will come back. You have Gaza. That's the whole point of what's going on with Gaza, with the bore of genocide. Make it a private silica fiefdom, corporate fiefdom. And now you have Greenland. It's no surprise that Palantir and a few other venture capitalists, tech venture capitalists, started investing in Greenland and approached Trump and said, look, we'd like Greenland. We got thermal energy, we got the minerals, and we want to experiment with the private corporate piece of territory there in Greenland. And so that's it's all connected. These dots are all connected at the underlying level. So I think I'll leave it at that.
One complementary question raised by Yonja, I also agree with her that since I'm also expert on social movements, that she asks the question in my mind, what about the struggles and resistances and social movements against this backlash? You know, there is also, we are only looking from one side. There is a worst scenario we are reading sometimes, but what about the other side? What about the struggles and resistances of the people? What do you see? And she asked your predictions about or possible movements in these kind of crises in the recent times. What are you expecting? What kind of resistances are you expecting, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, fantastic question, extremely important. So let's look at this. First of all, and I've written on this extensively, there is a global revolt that has never stopped. Everywhere you look, it may break out in one place at one moment, then another place at another moment. In fall, we saw these Gen Z uprisings. Yes, they were in Kuwait. Yes, they didn't really achieve much, but that's why I want to explain why. You have the uprising in Minnesota to push back against ICE. You had the BLM uprising here in 2020. There's never a moment where anywhere in the world we don't have revolts, we don't have popular mobilization. You had the Iranian people uprising right before this whole thing started, and then slaughtered. So there's a global revolt underway. There is mass discontent around the world. Things are reaching a boiling point. There's mass social movements wherever you go. But we have, and I've said this elsewhere, and you may disagree, and of course debate is extremely important on the, thus on the in and out of academia on the left. We have a crisis of the worldwide formal official left. The party left, if you want to call it. The left has not known how to update itself and reinvent itself for the 21st century, the organized political left. And so you have this tragic chasm between the masses of people around the world in open revolt, here, there, everywhere, and trying to figure out how to push back against this system, and on the other hand, leaderless in terms of an organized left with a viable project for the 21st century. Now, obviously, we can't discuss that here now. This is not the place, and there's no time for it. But you also have, I mentioned the global police state. My 2020 book is titled The Global Police State, and that's where I develop the theory and the analysis of militarized accumulation and accumulation by repression. And I point out crystal clear that the development of this global police state that Russia, China, all countries are part of, it's one, because you have to respond to the crisis of overaccumulation and stagnation through wars and conflicts, etc. But secondly, you have to contain the global working class and surplus humanity through vast new systems of repression, of warfare, of surveillance, of transnational social control. And what's that aimed at? It's aimed at all of the social movements. It's aimed at the working and popular classes. Another thing going on is that AI is already decimating the working class. That's behind the scenes. No one is even talking about that. And as more and more people move from being proletarians inserted into the circuits of capital accumulation to being proletarians pushed out and made surplus humanity, the more they rebel, we rebel, and the more the system needs to repress and control us in new ways. And Silica is also a project of new forms of surveillance and control, including biometric control, new forms of spatial control and spatial reorganization. So what do I foresee? I see mass uprisings. I also see that the rise of fascism is a response to this crisis, and specifically also to mass discontent. The ruling groups fear mass uprisings. They're starting already. And this war can trigger in escalation of those mass uprisings, especially when economies start to collapse, when the social collapse already underway deepens, etc. So yes, we are rebelling from below. We need to make transnational connections, and we're doing it. We need to do it more. And we also need, at least in our space like this, where we are, I mean, the 30 or 40 of us here, we need to be, and we are, organic intellectuals putting out this analysis for the social movements, for the people in resistance.
Exactly. Oh, that was fantastic again listening to you. Just Catherine asked us some special question for you. Your scenario about midterm elections in the US. Just short answer. What do you think as a William that about is your scenario in your mind?
Yeah, two things. One, if they happen, I
If they
have
happen.
yeah. I think right from the start, Trump and his inner circle have wanted to declare a state of emergency, and then they can suspend these elections. And each time they've pushed towards that, something else has happened. That's why the Trump program is very weak. Trump is the most unpopular president in recent history. And this war, only 25% of the population here in the United States supports the war, 75% are against it. So there's a legitimacy crisis that Trump regime is facing. They have not been able to declare the state of emergency. Now, I don't want to, now I want to say this is speculation. Don't want to be confused of a conspiracy theorist. I'm just speculating on this because the FBI announced Tuesday, this past Tuesday, so a little less than a week ago, or exactly a week ago, the FBI announced that there are Iranian sleeper cells and they're going to activate and carry out terrorist activity here in California. So, okay, it may be possible. This is why I don't want to be conspiracy theorists. I'm just saying that we've also seen things like this, where there is a false flag operation to legitimate the declaration of a state of emergency. So I don't think that can be ruled out. But the point is, with the midterm elections, if they are actually held. The other thing going on here that you may be following is that our voter rights are being undermined little by little and in all kinds of ways. Now you need to have a picture ID issued by the federal government in order to register to vote. Previously, there was easier to register to vote under the false claim that immigrants and people that are not allowed to vote are going to actually vote. So the multiple strategy is try and declare a state from Trump. Declare a state of emergency. Secondly, prevent a lot more people from voting. You may see ICE agents, these brown shirts, intimidating people at polling sites. But let's say the elections go ahead. The Democrats will win. Unless something changes radically, that will happen. They're likely to recapture the House, certainly, and possibly the Senate also. But here's the big issue. The Democrats are fully behind Pax Silica. They're not behind fascism at this time, but they are behind Pax Silica. They are behind trying to destroy Iran. They are behind Israel. They were behind the genocide. Trump just continued it. So, saying that the Democrats come back to power or can rein in on the Trump regime doesn't really change this big picture very much. Frankly, that's the reality.
If it's not the socialist side somehow.
Well, that we can't. Yes, sorry. Of course, I have to mention that there's an insurgency inside the Democratic Party, and that's extremely hopeful. Yeah. But that insurgency won't gain control of the House or the Senate, and if there is presidential elections in 3 years from now, and remember what happened. And I myself have to go soon, so I want to conclude with this point.
Yeah.
Remember what happened with Bernie Sanders. In 2016, he was set to win the primary nomination for the Democratic Party. Again in 2020, the mainstream Democrats, the corporate Democrats, they themselves broke their own democratic laws, the laws of the Democratic Party, the regulations, to prevent Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Right. So even if Mandami or AOL runs to be the presidential candidate in 2028, the Democratic Party either will make sure they can rein them in or won't let them win, the primary. So that's where we're at here. We need a mass labor mixture, labor and social movement, and a reinvented left in the United States and worldwide.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure, great pleasure to have you here, William. Hope to see you again, but not in these cases. Yes. At the end of war and about social issues, we can discuss which version is better for us. Okay. Thank you for us. Thank you having with us and spending time with us. Thanks
Take
a
care,
lot.
everyone. Stay safe, stay strong.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.